Chapter 2696, Ancient Fragments. Chapter 2696, Ancient Fragments. Exodus Tales. Chapter 2696, Ancient Fragments. Under Liang Jing's lead, Melancholic Smile and several other people entered the luxurious and spacious conference room. Dressed in white lab coats, the group looked very much like a bunch of scientific researchers. At this time, Melancholic Smile and the others looked much more worn out than before. Exhaustion was apparent on their faces, and their hair was a mess, as if they had just recovered from a serious illness. Shifeng couldn't help his surprise at this situation. "What's the matter with you? Why do you all look so haggard?" Shifeng asked curiously. Since Zero Wing was now a large organization, it had plenty of management and production talents. There was no need for Melancholic Smile and the others to handle everything personally. "Guild leader, I want to file a complaint," protested Cream Cocoa, who had a shy personality. "A complaint?" Shifeng was taken aback. Cream Cocoa was a master forger of Zero Wing. She also ranked among the top 3 in forging standards. It was only a matter of time before she became a grandmaster forger. Countless people in Zero Wing were hoping to get her to make them a weapon. If these people were to form a line, it would stretch from one end of Fenglin City to the other. After all, although Cream Cocoa and other master forgers had a meager chance of producing epic weapons and equipment, their chances of making dark gold weapons and equipment were considerable. In God's domain, epic weapons and equipment were exceedingly rare. Even the core members of first-rate guilds wouldn't necessarily own one. Hence, level 100+ dark gold weapons and equipment could already draw envy from passers-by. What more custom-made dark gold weapons and equipment? To put it simply, nobody in God's domain would dare bully Cream Cocoa. Anyone who did would be fortunate if Cream Cocoa just outright ignored them. "Yes, I want to complain, guild leader," Cream Cocoa said resolutely. "What do you want to complain about?" Shifeng asked curiously. "Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow," Cream Cocoa said with her cheeks puffed out. "They're too much. Guild leader, you need to give me justice. They're bullying you. That can't be, right?" Shifeng couldn't help being surprised once more. Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow were the vice guild leaders of Zero Wing. They managed the guild properly, and everyone in the guild also respected them. He found it hard to imagine the two bullying a cute girl like Cream Cocoa. "The 2 vice guild leaders asked us to complete 500 customized dark gold weapons in 5 days. They even threatened to cut our research funding if we don't meet the quota," Cream Cocoa complained. "Guild leader, you're a master forger too, so you know how difficult it is to make level 100+ dark gold weapons. Let alone 5 days, we'll barely be able to make 500 in 10 days. The whole forging department has been working overtime, but we are still short 300 weapons after 3 days. No matter how you look at it, we can't complete them within the next 2 days." Melancholic Smile and the others nodded in agreement with Cream Cocoa's words. Customized level 100+ dark gold weapons were not cabbages. They were delicate works that required all of a forger's attention. The slightest mistake would lead to failure. "That many?" The number Cream Cocoa reported shocked Shifeng. 500 customized dark gold weapons was a significant number. Moreover, these weapons were level 100+ weapons. So many of such weapons could elevate a first-rate guild's core team's overall combat power to a whole new level. "What weapon did those 2 ask you to make?" Shifeng asked. "It's this one." Cream Cocoa pulled out a tablet from her coat and swiped her finger across the screen, transferring the information on her tablet to the conference table's holographic projector. The projection of a black spear appeared above the table. The spear was as tall as an adult human, and engraved on it were intricate magic patterns. The spear looked extraordinary at a glance. What a powerful spear! Surprise filled Shifeng's eyes as he read the spear's detailed information. Thunder Spear, dark gold consumable, level 110 equipment requirement, strength 2000 ignore levels plus 30 ignore defense throwing distance increases according to the wielder's strength with a maximum of 3000 yards. Causes 1000% lightning damage to a 20-yard radius upon impact. How is this even a weapon? It's a long-range missile. Unfortunately, the spear was only for one-time use. If it had no limit, Raiding field bosses would be child's play. Even Tier 2 players could easily challenge Tier 4 mythic bosses with such a spear. If they could mass-produce this spear, siege warfare would become a joke. However, Shifeng also had to admit that the Thunder Spear's production was truly challenging. The required materials were secondary, costing only 20 gold or so in all. The crucial problem was the drawing of the magic patterns. If one weren't at the Master Magician standard, the production success rate would drop dramatically. Guild leader, please talk to the vice guild leaders. 5 days is too short. We need 10 days, at least, Cream Cocoa pleaded pitifully. I can talk to them about it. Shifeng nodded. He felt that Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow were indeed being difficult. That's great. You're the best, guild leader. Cream Cocoa breathed out a sigh of relief. However, no sooner had Cream Cocoa finished speaking than Shifeng did a U-turn, saying, however, I hope you all can do your best to make 3,000 Thunder Spears during this period. Guild leader. Cream Cocoa couldn't believe her ears. I'm not trying to trouble you. Slowly, Shifeng explained, this item is indeed very important, especially with Zero Wing lacking in high-end combatants. With this trump card, we can teach those hostile superpowers a lesson. The various superpowers currently didn't recognize Zero Wing as a superpower because of the guild's lack of high-end combatants. However, a sufficient number of Thunder Spears could compensate for the guild's inadequate combat power. Of course, I won't make you work in vain. Shifeng chuckled as he looked at Cream Cocoa's bitter face. He then brought out the unknown metals information and said, so long as you guys can complete this task, I'll let you research this metal. Cream Cocoa immediately criticized Shifeng's words in her mind, lumping her guild leader and vice guild leaders in the same group. He was completely ignoring her wishes and ruthlessly using her as a beast of labor. She couldn't engage at all in the crafting job she liked. However, after seeing the information displayed above the table, she fell into a daze. Besides Cream Cocoa, Melancholic Smile and the other master forgers present were also stupefied, a passionate flame igniting in their eyes as they stared at the projection above the table. It expels all mana. How is this possible? There's such a metal in God's domain. Cream Cocoa and the others muttered to themselves as if possessed. The exhaustion on their faces had also vanished completely as countless thoughts flooded their minds, as if the door to a new world had just opened to them. Shifeng wasn't surprised by this situation, either. For those devoted to the forging profession, a material like this only appeared in their dreams. After all, mana was the foundation of all things in God's domain. If one could completely expel mana from an object, one would be unstoppable. Just the thought of producing a weapon using such a metal excited these master forgers greatly. Why does this look familiar? Cream Cocoa mumbled as she read the metal fragments information. Familiar? You've seen them before? Shifeng asked with concern. These metal fragments were so mysterious that even his omniscient eyes couldn't glean any information from them. Hence, he planned to give it to the forging department for research. I think I read about them in an ancient book. Cream Cocoa nodded after giving the matter some thought. This type of metal existed in ancient times. However, it wasn't something that appeared naturally in God's domain but was created by ancient gods. Moreover, based on the appearance of these metal fragments, they should originally be parts of a whole. You're right. These metal fragments indeed look like the fragments of a sword, Shifeng said, nodding. Yet, for some reason, they can't be fused like fragmented legendary items. Although they can't be fused, I have a way to put these fragments together, Cream Cocoa said. But I'm not certain if this kind of patchwork will allow the weapon to exert its former power and effects. You have a way. Shifeng was even more surprised to hear this. These fragments were extraordinary. If they could be repaired to a certain extent and the resulting weapon only had the effect of expelling mana, it would still be a great weapon. There shouldn't be any problems, Cream Cocoa said with greater confidence. Okay. I'll leave these metal fragments with you. Just ask Melancholic for the materials you need. Shifeng did not doubt Cream Cocoa's confidence. After all, her talent was no joke. Only the short time she had come into contact with God's domain limited her. You said it yourself, guild leader. You must open all materials in the guild's material warehouse to me, Cream Cocoa said, beaming at Chiffon. All lifestyle players desperately needed precious materials. However, let alone legendary materials, even inferior legendary materials were hard to come by. Not even super guilds would give lifestyle players of her caliber free use of such materials. Now that Chiffon gave her carte blanche to use such materials, she naturally couldn't let this opportunity get away. Sure. Chiffon nodded. After giving the matter some more thought, though, he added, however, you still need to use them conservatively. Collecting those materials wasn't easy. Please rest assured, guild leader. I promise you I won't use them all, Cream Cocoa promised with a smile, afraid that Chiffon would take back his approval. Cream Cocoa behaved like a child who had just gotten a new toy, and Chiffon didn't know whether he should cry or laugh as he looked at her. Afterward, he sent all the information relevant to the metal fragments to Melancholic Smile and the others. As for whether the fragments could be repaired, he would leave that to luck. By the way, guild leader, the Azure Chamber of Commerce's members arrived yesterday. They are currently training with our guild's core members, and Duan Hanshan is their leader. However, as you have been busy, I didn't bother you about it, Liang Jing suddenly said. Duan Hanshan came in person? This piece of news puzzled Chiffon. Duan Hanshan was a giant in the Azure Chamber of Commerce. Typically, sending a management staff for a training meeting between guilds would be more than enough. It was inconceivable that a big shot like Duan Hanshan came in person. Do you want to meet them now? Liang Jing asked. Since Duan Hanshan came here in person, as the guild leader, I naturally have to meet him. Make the necessary arrangements, Chiffon said. I'll get it done now. Liang Jing promptly left the conference room. Meanwhile, as Chiffon discussed the ancient fragments with Cream Cocoa and the others, 2 men and 2 women walked toward Zero Wing Tower. And leading this group was an amiable, middle-aged man. After observing Zero Wing's internal members coming and going from the building for some time, Kurue, the cute girl in a red dress, turned to the peerless beauty beside her. Smiling, she said, Big sis, it looks like Zero Wing is only average. Not only are there barely any people here, but most of them haven't even reached the refinement realm yet. I can't imagine what powerful experts Zero Wing can offer the operation this time. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Although Zero Wing's headquarters' prosperity wouldn't necessarily have any relation to Zero Wing's strength, it should still reflect some of it. Mushin remained silent in response to Kurue's comment. While she knew that Zero Wing had just recently emerged, she never thought that the guild's headquarters would have so few members stationed in it. Moreover, the average strength of these members was appallingly weak. Let alone superpowers, they couldn't even hold a candle to the members found in the various pseudo-superpowers headquarters. Alright, let's go in and have a look. Uncle Hong frowned slightly. However, he didn't dwell on the matter, entering the lobby of Zero Wing's headquarters together with Mushin and the others. Chapter 2697, Inspecting Zero Wing. Chapter 2697, Inspecting Zero Wing Tower's lobby. With a ceiling soaring 9 meters high, the lobby looked very much like a small stadium. Aside from the reception for visitors, it also had a cafe and a lounge area, as well as a virtual combat platform for the guild's internal members to entertain themselves and visitors. Due to these reasons, quite a lot of people had gathered in the lobby. When Mushin and her companions entered the lobby, they quickly noticed several hundred people thronged the virtual combat platform. These people were spectating a duel between Zero Wing's internal members, and the scene was very lively. After seeing Mushin's group entering the lobby, one of the front desk receptionists approached them and asked, Hello, are you here to look around Zero Wing's headquarters? Or do you have other business to attend to here? My 2 nieces are interested in Zero Wing, so I brought them here for a visit today, Uncle Hong explained with a smile. Certainly. The receptionist smiled and took out 4 visitor cards. You may visit up to the 9th floor with this visitor card. The floors beyond are only for internal members. If you have any questions after your tour, feel free to consult with the front desk. Thank you. Uncle Hong nodded and accepted the visitor cards. Afterward, the receptionist returned to her position at the front desk and allowed Mushin's group to roam about the building freely. Zero Wing sure is generous. They're actually allowing outsiders to tour their headquarters. This will save us a lot of trouble, Karue commented in surprise as she received a visitor card from Uncle Hong. Usually, the various large guilds would place tight restrictions on their headquarters. Aside from the lobby, they generally wouldn't allow outsiders to visit other locations. They might be trying to lure more people to join Zero Wing, Mushin said. She more or less understood Zero Wing's circumstances. Although Zero Wing was prospering in God's domain, it remained an unknown entity in the real world. Despite having gone to great lengths to secure a guild headquarters, Zero Wing still lacked talents. Letting visitors tour its headquarters would undoubtedly give players unaware of Zero Wing's existence a better understanding of the guild. There are quite a few people here, but it's a pity that there are hardly any experts. Even the two people dueling are only at the half-step refinement realm, Karue commented as she looked at the battle taking place at the virtual combat platform. She could tell the two duelists' combat standards at a glance. I think we should be more cautious when partnering with such a guild. Our plan involves a lot of things. If outsiders see that we can't even find capable helpers, they'll start looking down on Frost Heaven. However, even after Karue finished speaking, Uncle Hong, Mushin, and Tian Cheng surprisingly remained silent as they stared at a group of young men and women standing among the crowd. How unexpected. Zero Wing really cannot be underestimated. They've actually kept such talents hidden, Uncle Hong praised as he looked at the several youths. Talents? Karue stared at those ordinary-looking youths in confusion. Young miss, you shouldn't underestimate those people. Although their auras aren't apparent, they are bona fide experts. That blue-haired guy, in particular, has completely restrained his aura. If I hadn't scrutinized him, I'm afraid I wouldn't even be aware of his existence. Tian Cheng, the seemingly vulnerable and honest youth standing beside Karue, explained quietly. Honestly, I'm not confident I can win against him. How is that possible? Tian Cheng's words stunned Karue. She suspected that the latter was joking with her. Tian Cheng was one of the peerless geniuses Frost Heaven cultivated. Not only had he reached the domain realm at a young age, but he also had a naturally gifted brain. His processing speed was much faster than ordinary people's. Even the older generation domain realm experts wouldn't necessarily be his match. How could Zero Wing possibly cultivate an expert rivaling Tian Cheng? They shouldn't be Zero Wing members, Mushin suddenly said. They're not. Uncle Hong was slightly surprised. 4 such youthful experts to appear in Zero Wing's headquarters, how could they not be Zero Wing members? I've seen their information before. Although they look somewhat different in God's domain, their appearances are roughly the same. That blue-haired youth should be Solitary Frost, the strongest of Azure's younger generation. I heard even Violet Sword values him greatly, Mushin explained. Unlike Uncle Hong, who managed the guild from behind the scenes, Mushin was responsible for the guild's intelligence network. Hence, she had a much better understanding of God's domain's various powers than Uncle Hong, especially when it came to the various superpowers' younger generation. She placed great importance on collecting such information. Why would Azure's peerless genius run all the way here? Karue grew even more puzzled at this revelation. The various superpowers treasured their peerless geniuses. They would shower these geniuses with all sorts of precious resources and require them to undergo strict training regimens every day. They wouldn't let these people leave their headquarters at will. Tian Cheng was a similar case. If not to inspect Zero Wing's strength this time, he wouldn't have received permission to leave Frost Heaven's headquarters. Zero Wing really is interesting. Not only did Azure's peerless genius come running over, but so did an old fellow from Azure, Uncle Hong said as he gazed at a cool-headed, middle-aged man resting and drinking tea in a corner of the lobby. Old fellow? When Karue checked the focus of Uncle Hong's attention, her mouth dropped wide open subconsciously. The man Uncle Hong was looking at was none other than Duan Hanshan, the strongest person of the Duan family's second generation. Duan Hanshan's reputation in the virtual gaming industry was in no way inferior to Uncle Hong's. Or, to put it in another way, she had grown up listening to the stories of these men. For such a big shot to visit Zero Wing's headquarters personally was definitely big news. At the same time Hong Xinyuan noticed Duan Hanshan. Duan Hanshan also noticed Hong Xinyuan's presence. The two of them then smiled at each other. "Come. Let's head over," Hong Xinyuan said, smiling. After saying so, Hong Xinyuan made his way to Duan Hanshan. As for Mushin and the others, they obediently followed him while bating their breaths. "Old Hong, what brings you here?" Duan Hanshan greeted Hong Xinyuan with a smile. "My two nieces are interested in Zero Wing, so I came to look around," Hong Xinyuan replied perfunctorily. "However, I'm curious as to why the Western Continent's ice demon is here. There still shouldn't be much interaction between the Eastern and Western continents. The Azure Chamber of Commerce mainly operated on the Western Continent, and the businesses it had on the Eastern Continent were very few. No matter how he thought about it, there shouldn't be much contact between Azure and Zero Wing." Narrowing his eyes, Duan Hanshan refused to believe a single word from Hong Xinyuan's mouth. He then stroked his beard and said flatly, "It's nothing. I just brought some of Azure's newcomers for a training meeting with Zero Wing." "You guys are here for training?" Hong Xinyuan reflexively arched a brow at Duan Hanshan, doubt coloring his face. Let alone Hong Xinyuan, even Kurue thought Duan Hanshan was messing with them. Although she was a newcomer who had just entered the virtual gaming industry recently, she knew that the Azure Chamber of Commerce possessed an extraordinary foundation. It stood high above ordinary superpowers. In comparison, Zero Wing was a new guild that had just emerged along with God's Domain. Who would believe that Azure would send its top talents to receive training from Zero Wing? "What? Don't believe me?" Duan Hanshan chuckled. "If we were in a super guild's headquarters, I would definitely believe you, but Zero Wing?" Hong Xinyuan chuckled and shook his head. Some guild operations indeed had to be kept confidential and could not be disclosed to outsiders. However, in Hong Xinyuan's opinion, Duan Hanshan's excuse was simply too poor. Saying that Azure's top talents had come to teach Zero Wing's newcomers would be more believable. "I knew you wouldn't believe me." Duan Hanshan's smile grew even brighter when he heard Hong Xinyuan's reply. He then pointed at the nearby virtual combat platform and said, "We're going to have a coaching battle with Zero Wing in a moment. Since you don't believe me, how about we make a bet?" "Bet? How are we betting?" Hong Xinyuan asked out of curiosity. "Didn't you bring a newcomer too?" Duan Hanshan glanced at Tian Cheng. Calmly, he said, "I can see he's quite good. How about you have him replace one of my newcomers? However, this is a precious spot, so I can't just let your newcomer join for free. I'll have to collect 5 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid as a deposit." Hong Xinyuan nearly choked at Duan Hanshan's proposal. Not only was Duan Hanshan asking his side to contribute manpower, but he was even asking for 5 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid. Duan Hanshan was too shameless. "Don't be in a hurry to reject me." Upon seeing Hong Xinyuan's dark face, Duan Hanshan added, "If you win this bet, I'll pay you back double. It seems you're quite optimistic of Zero Wing's members." Hong Xinyuan was somewhat surprised. 10 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid were enough to supply a top talent for half a year, a significant amount to any superpower. "Sort of." Duan Hanshan nodded. "However, if you lose, you'll have to compensate me with an additional 10 bottles. Hong Xinyuan was momentarily at a loss for words. Why did Duan Hanshan make it sound as if they would lose no matter what? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. When had Frost Heaven's reputation fallen to such a degree? How about it? "Wanna bet?" Duan Hanshan asked hastily when Hong Xinyuan remained silent for some time. However, Hong Xinyuan wasn't a young and arrogant rookie. He didn't pay any attention to Duan Hanshan's goading at all. Instead, he turned to look at the honest-looking Tian Cheng. "Tian Cheng, what do you think?" Hong Xinyuan asked. Chapter 2698, Zero Wing's Hidden Strength. Chapter 2698, Zero Wing's Hidden Strength. Upon hearing Hong Xinyuan's question, Kurue hurriedly signaled Tian Cheng to agree. After all, this was an excellent opportunity to disrupt Mushin's plan. Tian Cheng was the 5th strongest person among Frost Heaven's 10 swords. Out of everyone in Zero Wing, only Black Flame could possibly contend against him. However, Tian Cheng surprisingly did not answer right away. Uncle Hong, may I use my full strength in the match? Tian Cheng asked. The 10 swords were different from Frost Heaven's ordinary members. It was imperative that they conceal their strength from outsiders. Unless they received explicit orders from the upper echelon, they couldn't show their full power even if it meant suffering defeat. Tian Cheng's question didn't surprise Du and Han's Han. After all, this was also the case with the Azure Chamber of Commerce. Only during the annual competition before did Solitary Frost and the others have their restrictions lifted. You can use your full strength when necessary, Hong Xinyuan said after giving the matter some thought. Zero Wing's Black Flame possessed the strength to contend against the mythic-ranked foe Saint Devourers. If Black Flame stepped forward as Zero Wing's representative, Tian Cheng would undoubtedly lose if he held back his strength. Such an outcome wasn't what Hong Xinyuan wished to see. After all, his goal here today was to establish Frost Heaven's prestige. I don't have any problems, then. Fighting spirit flared in Tian Cheng's eyes. Good. I'll leave it to you, then. Hong Xinyuan nodded in satisfaction. He then turned to Du and Han's Han and said, Old Ice Demon, we have a deal. Initially, Hong Xinyuan had been considering how to go about making Zero Wing aware of Frost Heaven's might after doing a brief inspection of Zero Wing's headquarters. Now, it would seem he could save his efforts. That's settled. Du and Han's Han chuckled. He then turned to the blue-haired youth nearby and said, Jiu Han, 1, step down for now. Let this kid take your place. Him. After scanning the honest-looking youth standing beside Du and Han's Han, Jiu Han asked reluctantly, Are you sure? Immediately, both Tian Cheng and Hong Xinyuan had the urge to puke blood. Just how much were others underestimating Frost Heaven nowadays? However, Hong Xinyuan did not explode in anger. He merely signaled Tian Cheng with his eyes, conveying, you know what to do. They would let the Azure Chamber of Commerce know just how powerful Frost Heaven was through this duel. After a while, the coaching battle between Zero Wing and the Azure Chamber of Commerce officially began. At this time, more people thronged the virtual combat platform. Whether it was Zero Wing's members or Azure's members, both were ecstatic. I heard that a newcomer from Frost Heaven is taking Jiu Han's place. I wonder how many seconds that newcomer can last. I heard the best record so far is only 16 seconds. 16? In that case, Frost Heaven's newcomer should last 10 seconds. 10? Bullshit. I bet he won't last more than 6 or 7 seconds. The sudden substitution for the coaching battle sparked a heated discussion among the audience. In particular, Azure's members placed all their focus on guessing how many seconds Tian Cheng could last in the duel. This situation had Karue gnashing her teeth and dumbfounded Mushin. Is it because Frost Heaven hasn't made any major movements recently? Is everyone treating us as pushovers already? Mushin felt that something was amiss as she eavesdropped on the discussions. The behavior of Azure's members was too strange. Every one of them spoke as if being able to last only several seconds against Zero Wing's representative was something to be proud of. None of them possessed the consciousness of an expert at all. After Tian Cheng sat within the virtual combat cabin, the door on the other side of the cabin slowly opened. A young and beautiful girl then walked in, sat on the battle seat directly opposite Tian Cheng, and gently donned the link helmet. However, contrary to Tian Cheng's expectations, his opponent did not exude an expert's temperament and sharpness at all, the girl next door type. Are you kidding me? Anger immediately stirred in Tian Cheng's heart when he saw this girl. Initially, he thought that Zero Wing would send a great expert to fight him. He had even sought permission from Hong Xinyuan to use his full strength. However, not only did Zero Wing not send Black Flame to face him, but even the guild's 2 vice-guild leaders did not show up. Instead, it fielded a little girl. Zero Wing was thoroughly underestimating Frost Heaven. Old Ice Demon, this is the guild you have high hopes for? Hong Xinyuan chuckled involuntarily as he inspected Violet Cloud. After seeing Du and Hanshan's confidence, Hong Xinyuan had very nearly believed that there was more to Zero Wing than met the eye. However, given the current circumstances, it would seem he had been worried for nothing. Although Violet Cloud was indeed talented for reaching the Void Realm at such a young age, she was still way behind when compared to Tian Cheng. In fact, Tian Cheng should end the fight within seconds. Of course. Upon seeing the smile on Hong Xinyuan's face, Duan Hansan similarly smiled and suggested, "Why don't we add to the wager, then?" "What? Are you regretting your decision?" Hong Xinyuan smiled. "No. In addition to the previous wager, how about we bet 100,000 magic crystals?" Duan Hansan suggested happily. "What if I don't accept?" Hong Xinyuan asked. In Hong Xinyuan's opinion, Duan Hansan was simply trying to scare him into cancelling their bet. With the major update God's Domain was undergoing, the prices of magic crystals and various materials were bound to increase. Hence, the various superpowers were currently doing their best to collect as much of these resources as possible. No one was willing to sell. Moreover, 100,000 magic crystals was a considerable sum, one even Hong Xinyuan wouldn't wager casually. "It doesn't matter if you refuse. It's up to you," Duan Hansan said indifferently. "Okay, I'll bet with you," Hong Xinyuan agreed after seeing Duan Hansan give up so readily. "Good. I knew you were a good person," Duan Hansan chortled. "A good person?" Hong Xinyuan found Duan Hanshan's words strange. Meanwhile, during their conversation, the holographic screen outside the combat cabin also displayed the battlefield Violet Cloud and Tian Cheng stood on. The battlefield was a barren wilderness, with the two players 100 yards apart from each other. Both of them retained their attributes, levels, and equipment from when they logged out of God's Domain. At this time, Tian Cheng sported 6 pieces of epic equipment. The spear he held also gave off a dark glow and made the surrounding space tremble slightly, even while idle. With one glance, it was obvious that the spear was an extraordinary magic weapon with attributes that definitely surpassed those of ordinary epic weapons. As for Tian Cheng, he had already reached level 119. His level ranked at the top even among the entirety of God's Domain. "Hehe, now you know how powerful our guild is," Kurue muttered. However, contrary to Kurue's expectations, the crowd outside the combat cabin didn't reveal any surprise or exclaim in shock, remaining remarkably calm. On the other hand, complicated feelings flashed in Mushin's eyes as she looked at the holographic screen. It was as if she had just seen something unbelievable. Kurue followed her elder sister's gaze. Violet Cloud, level 121. Violet Cloud was 2 levels higher than Tian Cheng. Level 121? Kurue was dumbfounded. Frost Heaven had mobilized all its resources to help Tian Cheng reach level 119. Yet, a cleric from Zero Wing was actually 2 levels above him. Inside the virtual combat space, Tian Cheng was also surprised. He never imagined that someone would surpass him in terms of levels, and by 2 levels at that. "It seems you're quite capable. However, this level difference won't bring you any advantages," Tian Cheng said as he looked at Violet Cloud. "On the other hand, fighting in such an open wilderness is a huge disadvantage for a magical class like yourself. You won't have any room for evasion." "That might not be the case." Violet Cloud shook her head, disagreeing with Tian Cheng's opinion. "Is that so? Let me see if you're right." Then, after saying so, Tian Cheng suddenly charged at Violet Cloud, leaving behind an afterimage in his original location. Tier 3 skill, Shadow Thorn. Due to the virtual combat cabin's limitations, he couldn't replicate 100% of his strength in God's Domain. However, his physique and basic attributes were the same as what he had in the game. While ordinary Tier 3 players might take some time to cross 100 yards, Tian Cheng boasted the Tier 3 hidden class Dragonspear warrior. In the blink of an eye, he appeared before Violet Cloud and thrust his spear at her. A flurry of spear images rained down on the cleric, every one of them distorting space. This attack was Tian Cheng's best technique, something even domain realm experts found challenging to receive. A combination of magic and martial arts. Duan Hansan immediately understood the underlying principles of Tian Cheng's technique, and he had to admit that the youth was indeed very talented. While Tian Cheng's technique might look like a series of simple thrusts, these attacks actually formed a magic array that allowed them to integrate into one. Tian Cheng's mana manipulation ability was simply inhuman. The power of his attack was definitely on par with mythic monsters of the same level. If this attack struck a magical class player, The result would undoubtedly be instant death. Just as Kurue felt proud of Tian Cheng's performance, a sigh entered her ears. That guy sure is brave. He actually entered melee range. He's dead for sure. Kurue quickly dismissed these words. After all, if not a melee, how should a melee player fight a magical class player? At range? Even a greenhorn wouldn't speak such nonsense. Defying Kurue and the others' expectations of a quick retreat and a counterattack once Tian Cheng's assault ended, Violet Cloud held her position. Moreover, she even took the initiative to meet Tian Cheng's attack. Just when the rain of spears was about to land, Violet Cloud swung her staff horizontally and raised her free hand to receive the fierce assault. Not only did this scene stun the spectators outside the combat cabin, but even Tian Cheng himself was puzzled. A magical class player trying to receive a melee player's attack without spells was simply suicide. However, when Violet Cloud's hand was about to come into contact with the spear images, a twofold magic array suddenly appeared on her palm. Tier 3 defensive spell, Amethyst Barrier. After summoning the Amethyst Barrier, Violet Cloud waved her hand once more, pushing out the crystalline barrier. The next moment, not only did the spear images scatter upon clashing with the Amethyst Barrier, but the barrier even continued pressing forward toward Tian Cheng, forcing the latter to dodge it. Tier 3 defensive spells can be used like that. Kurue was stunned when she saw Violet Cloud nullify Tian Cheng's attack. Defensive spells in God's domain were generally stationary, they couldn't be moved once cast. The main reason for this was the inhuman level of mana control required to execute such a complex feat. This was something beyond even domain realm experts, yet Violet Cloud had done it. Meanwhile, just as Tian Cheng dodged the Amethyst Barrier and was about to launch another attack on the cleric, he suddenly froze in shock. Over 300 magic blades had appeared around Violet Cloud, dancing around her like sprites. Every one of them carried enough power to decimate heaven and earth. Without giving Tian Cheng a chance to catch his breath, these magical sprites immediately shot at him. Double speed casting? Tian Cheng hurriedly executed a defensive combat technique while simultaneously activating a Tier 3 defensive skill. The next moment, a pitch-black phantom emerged from Tian Cheng's body and spread toward the oncoming magic blades. Boom! 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 A series of explosions occurred in midair, the sound reverberating throughout the battlefield. The spatial fluctuations occurring were even visible on the virtual combat platform's holographic screen. Tian Cheng's defense could be said to be perfect. He had already reached consummate mastery over his domain. Every one of his actions had been simplified to the extreme, and they created an iron wall before him. 3 seconds later, a person's silhouette flew out of the dust veiling the battlefield and smashed into the ground. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. How is this possible? Kurue was stupefied when she identified this silhouette. After all, this person was none other than Tian Cheng. Chapter 2699, A Foregone Conclusion. Chapter 2699, A Foregone Conclusion. I actually lost? Tian Cheng wore a dazed expression when he woke up back inside the combat cabin. For a time, his thoughts lingered on the final moment of the fight. What exactly happened to Tian Cheng? How did he get defeated so suddenly? Questions flooded Kurue's mind as she stared at the holographic screen. Tian Cheng was clearly holding his own against the magic blades a second ago. Yet, in the next second, he got devoured by them. This situation was like a nightmare. Tian Cheng had combined a bronze defensive combat technique with a Tier 3 defensive skill. Even Tier 4 mythic monsters couldn't have harmed him. How could a Tier 3 cleric like Violet Cloud possibly land an attack on him? However, unlike Kurue, none of the spectators around the Frost Heaven contingent were surprised by this situation. Azure's members, in particular, even felt that this was a reasonable outcome. She seized his mana. Mushin gasped deeply as she looked at Violet Cloud's figure displayed on the screen. Her control over mana is already at the Tier 4 standard. She has full control over the mana within her sphere of control, and players below Tier 3 cannot use mana to fight her. In God's domain, players would start learning how to manipulate mana after reaching Tier 2. And to advance to Tier 3, they had to construct a mana body, which allowed them to manipulate the ambient mana to power and enhance their skills and spells. However, if players couldn't utilize the ambient mana, then their skills and spells would be drastically weakened. In contrast, once a player's control over mana reached the Tier 4 standard, they could control all the mana within a 50-yard radius or more. And within this range, the skills and spells they used would far surpass that of ordinary Tier 3 players. With the combination of these two effects, even though Tian Cheng had vastly superior combat standards, he was still no match for Violet Cloud in terms of overall combat power. Realization dawned upon Kurue when she heard Mushin's explanation, and complicated emotions filled her heart as she looked at Violet Cloud. "She's not much older than me, right?" Kurue mumbled to herself. Could she be the incarnation of a Tier 4 NPC? Not only did Violet Cloud reach the Void Realm standard at such a young age, but her control over mana had also reached the Tier 4 standard. This was a feat that veteran domain realm experts had yet to accomplish. Hong Xinyuan, sitting beside Kurue, reacted surprisingly calmly to the duel's outcome. In fact, a hint of appreciation even appeared in his eyes as he looked at Violet Cloud. "Old Hong, you didn't lose unjustly, right?" Duan Hanshan asked as he stroked his beard. "It seems you figured me out long ago." Hong Xinyuan didn't get angry over losing 15 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid and 100,000 magic crystals. On the contrary, a smile even appeared on his face. Of course. Any well-informed superpower could find out about that matter. Duan Hanshan nodded. "You didn't lose for nothing this time. You should know that Elder Sinful Flame lost to this young lady in our internal competition. You should be laughing at your harvest." However, what Duan Hanshan didn't know was that the current Violet Cloud was much stronger than when she fought against Sinful Flame. This time, she didn't rely on her staff to raise her concentration to the Tier 4 standard. Instead, she had reached Tier 4 by relying on herself. In other words, her mana control had improved by a significant margin. Yes, this is a worthwhile loss. Hong Xinyuan also couldn't help smiling at Duan Hanshan's words. This trip wasn't in vain, after all. "Uncle Hong?" Hong Xinyuan's happy reaction confused Kurue. That was 15 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid and 100,000 magic crystals they were talking about. This was a significant sum, even for Frost Heaven. "That's right. This is a worthwhile loss." Mushin also smiled. Frost Heaven's operation this time was of utmost importance. It might even affect the situation of God's domain. It was naturally better for the foreign aid they requested to be as strong as possible. Although Tian Cheng couldn't display his full strength with the virtual combat platform, the abilities Violet Cloud had revealed thus far were already more than enough to qualify her as a capable helper. "Mushin, you did a good job this time," Hong Xinyuan praised Mushin. "I am only trying to help the guild." Mushin smiled in delight. It wasn't easy to earn Hong Xinyuan's praise. "Afterward, notify Black Flame that I will give Zero Wing 20 slots for our secret operation. Also, aside from the 100 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid, the Boulder Corporation will also give Zero Wing 3 slots to enter the upper zone if the operation succeeds," Hong Xinyuan said, smiling. "Uncle Hong?" Mushin was shocked. For a moment, she even thought her ears were playing tricks on her. "Uncle Hong, aren't you giving too much?" Kurue's eyes were also wide with shock. She wondered whether Hong Xinyuan had lost his mind. Zero Wing was an outsider. Giving the guild some items and credits should already be more than enough. Yet, Hong Xinyuan was actually offering those precious slots as remuneration. If the corporation's Grand Elders were to learn of this, they would definitely jump in shock. After all, many of these Grand Elders' children and grandchildren didn't even get those slots. "How generous of you, Old Hong. If I remember correctly, you shouldn't have that many reserved slots in hand, right?" Duan Hanshan was also astonished by Hong Xinyuan's decision. To ordinary people, entering the upper zone was but a dream. To the wealthy, this name was something they all desired. The upper zone was a special region the Green God Company had constructed, and only select megacities had it. In total, there were fewer than 60 upper zones worldwide. Meanwhile, The main reason why countless wealthy people sought to enter the upper zone was longevity and youth. According to statistics gathered 50 years ago, the average life expectancy of people living in the upper zones had already reached 130 years. In addition, residents could remain in their prime up to 80 years old. In other words, an 80-year-old person living in an upper zone could be as physically fit as a 50-year-old person living in the outside world. And this was only the statistics from 50 years ago. The upper zones offered many other benefits. However, only residents would know what these benefits were. Meanwhile, the number of people allowed to enter the upper zones every year was limited. Moreover, one wouldn't necessarily be able to enter an upper zone just by having money. One also needed to meet certain conditions. Of course, the Green God Company would also reserve a number of slots for the international corporations that were its partners. However, this number was so incredibly small that these corporations couldn't bear giving any of their slots to outsiders. Only those who had made great contributions could receive a slot. For Hong Xinyuan to offer 3 slots to Zero Wing was an unreasonably generous move. "I can still afford to give away 3 slots," Hong Xinyuan said, clicking his tongue. However, while he pretended not to care very much, the distress in his eyes couldn't escape any of the experts present. "It seems you have it tough, as well," Duan Hanshan said as he gave Hong Xinyuan a complicated look. Of those present, only he knew of some of the reasons behind Hong Xinyuan's decision. However, Duan Hanshan's words bewildered Mushin and Kurue. "All right, our goal has been achieved. We should go now." Hong Xinyuan chuckled without giving an explanation. He then turned around and walked out of the lobby, showing no intention of staying even a moment longer. After Hong Xinyuan's group left, Ji Yu Han, who was standing some distance away, approached Duan Hanshan. "Elder Duan, why did Frost Heaven pay Zero Wing a visit this time?" Ji Yu Han asked out of curiosity. "It's nothing important." Duan Hanshan took a deep breath, complex emotions darkening his eyes as he watched Hong Xinyuan's group exit the building. "It's just that a big change is imminent, and the time you youngsters have is dwindling. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." "EU a big change?" Ji Yu Han grew even more confused at Duan Hanshan's words. Just as Ji Yu Han was about to ask more questions, Liang Jing walked out of an elevator and approached them. "Elder Duan, our guild leader would like to see you," Liang Jing said respectfully. "It seems your guild leader finally decided to come out. He really kept this old man waiting." Nodding, Duan Hanshan continued, "It just so happens I want to talk to him about the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion." "Lead the way." "This way, please, Elder Duan." Liang Jing led Duan Hanshan to the express elevator to the building's top floor. Chapter 2700, Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Disappearance. Chapter 2700, Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Disappearance. Zero Wing Tower, top floor reception room. Shifeng, meeting you truly isn't easy. This old man has waited 2 whole days, Duan Hanshan said facetiously as he took a sip of tea on the sofa. Despite Duan Hanshan's jocular words, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes as he looked at Shifeng. He could feel something different about Shifeng, yet he couldn't put his finger on it at the moment. In God's domain, Shifeng felt like a vast ocean. Now, although he still gave off a calm and vast feeling, Duan Hanshan could also feel hints of wind and rain coming from the youth. It was as if this calm could explode at any moment. In fact, Duan Hanshan could even feel a faint trace of danger from Shifeng right now. However, this feeling was intermittent, leaving Duan Hanshan uncertain. Shifeng himself didn't notice this change. After completing his Tier 4 promotion and exiting his virtual gaming cabin, he only felt that his thoughts had become sharper and nothing more. This situation also puzzled Shifeng somewhat. Unlike the previous breakthroughs he had, his body didn't become deprived of energy because of the breakthrough. On the contrary, his current physical condition was surprisingly good. He had not entered a state of weakness after this breakthrough. "Elder Duan, you jest. I truly had to go to great lengths to get out of God's domain," Shifeng explained. "May I know why you decided to visit Zero Wing's headquarters personally this time? Did something big happen?" Duan Hanshan was the Duan family's representative in the Azure Chamber of Commerce. His status was not the slightest bit inferior to that of the guild leaders of super first-rate guilds. No matter how one looked at it, there was no way someone of such status would escort a bunch of newcomers for training. This was especially true for Azure, a superpower that focused on commerce. Azure was much busier than combat-oriented guilds, as it had to maintain a vast and accurate information network. You really are a straightforward person. You behave nothing like the guild leaders of other powers. Duan Hanshan chuckled. However, I am similar to you in this aspect. In that case, I'll get straight to the point. Indeed, I didn't come here for the training meeting but another major event. This matter might even have something to do with Zero Wing. A major event that concerns Zero Wing? Shifeng couldn't help growing curious. May I know what this event is, Elder Duan? If even an individual like Duan Hanshan spoke of this matter as a major event, then it had to involve the various superpowers. However, based on what he heard from Liang Jing, aside from the system update, there shouldn't be any other major events in God's domain recently. You should be aware of what happened to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, right? Duan Hanshan asked. Yes. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 3 pavilion masters disappeared together with their close aides, and there has been no news of them even now, Shifeng replied, nodding. The 3 pavilion masters' disappearance had caused an uproar among the various superpowers. He had also asked Mu Lingshaw to inquire into the situation, but she still hadn't discovered anything thus far. The matter I spoke of is somewhat related to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, Duan Hanshan said, his expression growing serious. 2 days ago, the guild leader and vice-guild leaders of the 9-star family all disappeared. The 9-star family's leadership disappeared? How is this possible? Shifeng was stunned by the news. Not only was the 9-star family a super first-rate guild, but its background was even stronger than the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions. According to rumors, the guild had suddenly gained the support of a powerful corporation. It currently occupied a portion of several empires and was close to catching up with Starlink. Moreover, the 9-star family had 6 vice-guild leaders, who independently managed the guild branches in different empires. The fact that all of them had disappeared overnight was even more unbelievable than the simultaneous disappearance of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 3 pavilion masters. As for the possibility of someone attacking the 9-star family's headquarters, that was even more impossible. After all, powers of such caliber possessed comprehensive security systems. Even several Grandmaster martial artists shouldn't be able to kidnap these people in secret. News of this matter has been blocked. Not many superpowers know of it, Duan Hanshan said in a quiet tone. What does this have to do with Zero Wing? Shifeng grew even more curious after hearing Duan Hanshan's words. Could the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion have a hand in this matter? No. Duan Hanshan shook his head. According to Azure's investigations, both the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions and 9-star family's leaders disappeared after secretly meeting with Saint's Hand. And according to inside information from the 9-star family, after the guild's leaders disappeared from the game, a group of mysterious people took their gaming cabins away. A group of mysterious people took their gaming cabins? Is this Saint's Hand's doing? After hearing Duan Hanshan's explanation, Shifeng suspected that the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had faced a similar situation. Also, did you find out where their cabins were transported to? While we still don't know if this incident is related to that mysterious bunch in God's domain, we did find out where the cabins were transported to, Duan Hanshan replied, chuckling. Where? Shifeng asked curiously. Logically, with the forces the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and 9-star family wielded, the 2 guilds should have been able to locate their leaders quickly. However, even now, there was no news from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. This was truly a bizarre situation. The upper zone. Duan Hanshan said these words one by one. The upper zone. The fog enveloping Shifeng's heart grew heavy. He simply couldn't understand what was going on. Phoenix Rain was merely one of the leaders of a super first-rate guild. Why would someone of her status be dragged into such a huge incident? Shifeng knew a little about the upper zone. It was a special region capable of extending the lifespan of its residents. However, not just any wealthy person could enter it. In the eyes of the upper zone's residents, ordinary corporations were no different from ants. Even the leaders of the major corporations backing the Azure Chamber of Commerce would have to maintain a low profile while inside the upper zone, all the more someone like Phoenix Rain. It wouldn't be far-fetched to say that there shouldn't be any relations between Phoenix Rain and the upper zone. Saint's Hand is deeply involved in this matter. I came here this time to tell you that it's best not to provoke Saint's Hand too much during this time. Who knows? Zero Wing might end up becoming the next 9-star family, Duan Hanshan warned earnestly. Provoke Saint's Hand? Revealing a bitter smile, Shifeng said, I've never taken the initiative to provoke them. To occupy the Orc Empire, Saint's Hand had already set its sights on Silverwing Town. It wasn't that he wanted to provoke Saint's Hand. Rather, the other party had already resolved to take his life. However, you don't have to worry too much about this, either, Duan Hanshan said, chuckling. Don't need to worry? Shifeng asked, puzzled. Although he had adequate strength now, he was certain the security of Zero Wing's headquarters was far from comparable to that of the 9-star families and Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's headquarters. Frost Heaven's Hong Xinyuan has promised that so long as Zero Wing helps Frost Heaven complete the task you two agreed on, he will give Zero Wing 3 reserved slots to enter the upper zone, Duan Hanshan said, smiling. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Any superpower would laugh to death if they received such a wonderful opportunity. You should know how extraordinary the upper zones are. Those places are possibly the safest locations in the world. Although both the 9-star family and Dragon Phoenix Pavilion were super first-rate guilds, the corporations backing them lacked the power to secure slots to enter the upper zone for the guild's leadership. Otherwise, the two guilds wouldn't have faced such a predicament. This piece of news rendered Shifeng speechless. Just what is Frost Heaven trying to do for it to be so generous? These were reserved slots for the upper zone they were talking about. All else aside, just the upper zone's security aspect was already more than enough to make the various superpowers guild leaders go crazy. During his previous life, even when the guild leaders of first-rate guilds offered billions of credits, they still couldn't secure a slot in the upper zone. Only the guild leaders of super first-rate guilds could barely manage to do so. Yet, now, Frost Heaven was actually offering 3 slots to Zero Wing. At this moment, Shifeng wouldn't be surprised if Frost Heaven wanted Zero Wing to mount a full-on assault on the 5 great super guilds. You're quite lucky, honestly. If it were any other time, Frost Heaven most likely wouldn't offer such a price for Zero Wing's help, Duan Hanshan said, sighing. As for what exactly Frost Heaven wants Zero Wing to do, I can't reveal it to you now. Someone from Frost Heaven will notify you when the time comes. In any case, it isn't a simple task. Zero Wing has to be careful. Otherwise, it wouldn't be surprising if Zero Wing were to perish. Thank you for your reminder, Elder Duan. Shifeng sincerely thanked Duan Hanshan. Duan Hanshan's willingness to reveal the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions and Saint's Hands matters to him already demonstrated Azure's sincerity in its partnership with Zero Wing. Shifeng naturally had to show his appreciation. Azure hasn't done anything noteworthy. How you'll proceed in the future is still up to you to decide, Duan Hanshan said, chuckling. Seeing as Shifeng was willing to accept the Azure Chamber of Commerce's kindness, his task here was done. All right, I should go now. After saying so, Duan Hanshan left the reception room. He didn't even let Shifeng send him off as he silently disappeared from Zero Wing's headquarters. Guild leader, what should we do now? Liang Jing asked worriedly after Duan Hanshan left. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Saint's Hand posed too much of a threat. If they didn't act carefully, they might very well end up like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and 9-star family. We can only take things as they come, Shifeng said. However, we'll have to reorganize our plans. Once God's Domain System update ends, have all of Zero Wing's main force members gather at Silverwing City. It's about time Zero Wing underwent some changes. God's Domain's major updates were extraordinary, each triggering a complete shift in the game's structure. Since the first major update came a little sooner than expected, he would have to start overhauling Zero Wing's expansion plans. Otherwise, the guild wouldn't even have scraps to fight over, let alone contending against Saint's Hand and the various superpowers. I understand. I'll get it done as soon as I go online, Liang Jing said, nodding. Time passed quickly. Before anyone knew it, God's Domain's major update had been completed, and everyone started logging back into the game at 7 o'clock in the morning. Lying in his virtual gaming cabin, Shifeng took a deep breath when he saw the login button appear on the screen before him. Login. Chapter 2701, Era of Hegemony begins. Chapter 2701, Era of Hegemony begins. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residence. Along with a flash of brilliance in the underground secret room, Shifeng's figure gradually appeared. Unlike the previous times he had logged into God's Domain, Shifeng now felt a little dizzy, the dizziness lasting for several seconds. And when he recovered, he found that everything in front of him seemed completely different. If the previous God's Domain looked like an extremely high-definition image in Shifeng's eyes, then the current God's Domain looked like the real thing. In other words, the sense of reality he got from the game was on a completely different level. This kind of realism is so nostalgic. A smile appeared on Shifeng's face when he perceived his current situation. Most players wouldn't notice any significant changes in the game's realism after the major update. However, for Shifeng, who had fought in God's Domain for 10 years in his previous life, the changes were distinct. Previously, he constantly felt as if there was a barrier between his body and brain. He couldn't control his virtual body as easily as he did his real body no matter what. However, this barrier was now gone. It was like the difference between 99% and 100%. This kind of change might not mean anything to ordinary players, but the difference was massive for expert players. Take humans and gorillas, for example. Despite there being only a 1% genetic difference, the two were worlds apart. Combat in God's Domain was different from combat in the real world. Due to physical limitations, there were many techniques the human body could not exhibit in the real world. Take a child trying to lift a 1-ton sword, for example. With how tiny the child's physique was, such a feat would be impossible. However, what if the child's physique allowed him to swing the sword easily? One could easily imagine how terrifying the child's destructive power would be. After adjusting to the changes, Shifeng left the secret room, heading to his office to sort out the information on the major update. When Shifeng walked out of the secret room, the Tier 3 NPC guard stationed at its entrance panicked. Like a frightened rabbit, the guard hurriedly straightened his back and put on a respectful look. "Good morning, my lord." The Tier 3 NPC respectfully saluted Shifeng. "Good morning." Shifeng nodded and smiled at the NPC named Flet. "It's finally here. I wonder how chaotic God's Domain's major forces will become." In reality, the biggest change brought about by God's Domain's first major update wasn't in the realism but the NPCs and monsters. Both NPCs and monsters gained their own thoughts after the major update. Yes, thoughts. Not intelligence. The so-called AI that powered the NPCs and monsters before was merely a well-designed program that could react to players' words and actions to a reasonable extent. Most of the NPCs and monsters in the game couldn't actually think for themselves. Generally, only NPCs at Tier 5 and above had such an ability. But now, no matter how weak the monster or NPC was, they would all have their own thoughts. This would bring about a great change to God's Domain. After all, from a certain perspective, NPCs and monsters were no longer different from real humans. With this change, fights with monsters and NPCs would feel no different from PvP fights. No. To be precise, fights against monsters and NPCs would become even more troublesome than PvP fights. Unlike players, monsters and NPCs were accustomed to fighting in God's Domain. Some monsters and individual NPCs had started fighting at birth and accumulated 10, 20, 30 years or more of experience. Their combat experience far exceeded that of ordinary players that had been in God's Domain for only 1 or 2 years. However, this still wasn't the greatest impact on God's Domain's players. What would really affect players were the changes in the behavior of NPCs and monsters. From now on, NPCs would not only actively hunt monsters but also compete with players for various quests and resources at the Adventurers Association. They would even contest for the precious resources and opportunities needed for class promotions. When the first major update hit God's Domain in the past, this change had given the various powers a huge headache. After all, Not only had they lost their monopoly on resources, but NPCs and monsters had even stolen a significant portion of these resources. Of course, this change came with its benefits, as well. For example, players unaffiliated with any powers could choose to join NPC teams to do quests. This option instantly increased the survivability of independent players. It also allowed independent players to get their hands on resources and equipment that were previously unattainable. Meanwhile, after Shafong left the underground hall, the NPC named Fret breathed out a deep sigh of relief. The Lord seems strange today. He normally doesn't talk to us guards, yet he actually said good morning to me today. Fret, who was clad in silver mail armor, thought in confusion as he looked at Shafong's departing back. Did the Lord notice me slacking, so he greeted me as a warning? Thinking up to this point, Fret shivered involuntarily. This won't do. I mustn't slack off anymore. Such a good job is hard to find in the entire Star Moon Kingdom. If I lose it, those former colleagues of mine will definitely treat me as a joke. Fret raised his vigilance and straightened his posture even further. Meanwhile, when the other NPC guards in the underground hall saw Shafong, they also started secretly discussing Shafong's peculiar behavior today. Shafong was someone standing in a lofty position. In the past, he normally wouldn't even say a word to them. He was basically the representation of coldness and ruthlessness. Yet, Shafong gave off the feeling of a spring breeze today. This sudden transformation made the guards in the underground hall uneasy for some time. At this time, these NPCs weren't the only ones feeling doubtful and insecure. The players throughout God's domain also felt surprised and confused by the changes to the game. The forums of God's domain were also burning with discussions. Why do those NPCs feel like living people? They're even discussing us players in private. What is going on here? You think that's strange? My personal guard actually asked for a day off to take care of his injured wife. You guys probably haven't been to the Adventurers Association yet, right? Right now, NPCs are taking on the quests posted there. One NPC even seduced the beauty in my party to go questing with him. For a while, the players of God's domain were bewildered by these changes to the NPCs. Some found the changes novel, while others found them flabbergasting. However, most players rejoiced at these changes. Such sentient NPCs were simply unheard of. The players felt as if they had actually come to another world. This was especially true when they heard these NPCs discussing them. The NPCs would even rave about the experts among players. Some well-known expert players even had fans among the NPCs, a situation ordinary players couldn't help envying. However, unlike ordinary players, God's domain's various major powers were far less delighted at these changes. In fact, these sudden changes were practically fatal to some of the smaller guilds. This was because the major update didn't just grant NPCs their own thoughts. The monsters out in the fields had also become much more troublesome to handle. This was especially true for monsters at the Lord rank or above. The wealth of combat experience they possessed made them even stronger than experts in terms of combat standards. A Lord-ranked monster could easily pummel a Tier 2 expert of the same level. Some great lords could even contend against Tier 3 experts. However, this still wasn't the worst part. The truly terrible change the major update brought was the removal of fixed dungeons. Dungeons were a stable source of equipment and materials for the various major powers in God's domain. Quite a number of guilds would grind low-level dungeons for all sorts of materials rather than raid high-level dungeons. In fact, small guilds weren't the only ones to use this approach to secure materials. Even the various superpowers did so. After all, with the difficulty of high-level dungeons, raiding them would definitely result in casualties, which would, in turn, cause the players in the team to regress. Hence, the various superpowers took the more conservative approach to obtain materials. They would have only one vanguard team for raiding high-difficulty dungeons. That way, they could ensure that they possessed the latest and best equipment and materials available while simultaneously having a large amount of basic materials to supply the vanguard team. However, that all changed with the game's major update. After the update, all the fixed dungeons had disappeared. Now, only dungeons that appeared at random were available. Meanwhile, Some of these dungeons were challenging, while some were a walk in the park. Moreover, every one of these dungeons could be raided only once before they disappeared. If one didn't raid the dungeon upon discovering it, there was a high chance someone else would raid it first. This change dumbfounded not only the various small guilds but even the superpowers. With this situation, how were they supposed to develop their guilds from now on? Similarly, the various adventurer teams in God's domain also started growing uneasy. Not only did resources grow scarcer, but NPCs had even emerged as competitors. One could easily imagine how intense the fight for resources would become in the future. The various superpowers might even remove their disguises and start fighting and competing for real. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residence, Guild Leader's office. Guild Leader, everyone's arrived, Liang Jing reported as she looked at Shifeng, who was arranging the latest information on God's domain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Are Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow also here? Shifeng asked. Although Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had already exited the spacetime maze, as they were transported to a special location, they couldn't contact others through the game at all. They could only contact others through the real world. They're here, but hesitation appeared on Liang Jing's face. Puzzled, Shifeng asked, but what? Tentatively, Liang Jing whispered, I might be mistaken, but when I saw them just now, they felt alien. Chapter 2702, Silence. Chapter 2702, Silence Alien? Shifeng failed to comprehend Liang Jing's words for a moment. As his assistant, Liang Jing didn't just take care of affairs in Zero Wing's headquarters. Normally, she would also help Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose with tasks in God's domain. Hence, she had frequent contact with the two vice guild leaders. In fact, Liang Jing should be even more familiar with them than he was. Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had been absent from the guild for only some weeks. No matter how he looked at it, Liang Jing shouldn't have a reason to describe them as alien. Are you saying that their temperament has changed? Shifeng asked after giving the matter some thought. A person's temperament would change along with the improvement of their knowledge and mental state, especially after a breakthrough in the limit of their brain activity. Shifeng was a perfect example of this. No. Shaking her head, Liang Jing whispered in a somewhat uncomfortable voice, that kind of feeling. It's like looking at complete strangers wearing their faces. Wearing their faces? Liang Jing's words surprised Shifeng. Are you sure? I'm very sure. Liang Jing said earnestly. Okay. Shifeng nodded solemnly. This matter ends here. Just treat them like you normally do. Guild leader, are the vice guild leaders all right? Liang Jing asked worriedly. No matter how she looked at it, this change simply wasn't normal. If Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose really had a problem, Zero Wing would be in great danger. After all, the two vice guild leaders were responsible for most of the guild's daily activities, whereas Shifeng was mainly a figurehead. I'm not sure yet. Shifeng shook his head. I'm afraid I'll know what's going on only after I meet with them in person. Spacetime mazes were very special existences in God's domain. Only an extremely small number of players would encounter a spacetime maze when traveling through spacetime passages. An even smaller number of players would encounter a mysterious space after leaving the spacetime maze. This mysterious space was unresolvable. Many people attributed its appearance to a bug in the game. Every player that entered this mysterious space would end up in a very special world. Nobody knew what kind of world it was, and only one thing existed in this world. Slaughter. One would either be hunted down endlessly, or hunt others endlessly, or fight on an endless battlefield. It was as if the fragments of countless memories in God's domain were collected in this special world. Even when players were killed in this world, they wouldn't truly die. They would only go from one dream to another after their deaths, and this cycle would loop endlessly. Moreover, the pain players felt in this world wasn't mitigated in the slightest. The concept of time in this world was supposedly blurred. The time players experienced inside this world was something only their minds perceived, with no effect on their real bodies. Hence, even when a player spent 1 or 5 years inside this special world, only hours or days might have passed in the real world. However, Time was the scariest thing in existence. After all, time could wear down everything, let alone humans. If gentle snow and aqua rose really came out from this mysterious space, a lot of time must have passed for them already, so much so that even their memories had blurred. Hence, it was only normal for them to change. The only thing Chiffon didn't know was how many years gentle snow and aqua rose had spent in that mysterious space. Meanwhile, according to the statistics from his previous life, the longer the time one spent in that special world, the greater the influence on one's mentality. Zero Wing Residence's top-floor conference room, Zero Wing's upper echelon and core team leaders were currently seated inside this magnificent conference room. Of these people, even the weakest was a level 116, Tier 3 player, while the strongest were Violet Cloud and Fire Dance, who had both reached level 121 already. However, there was still a significant gap between them and Chiffon, who was level 125. Fire Dance had already replaced her old gear with a set of dark red leather armor. Based on the magic patterns etched into her armor, the armor was a set. Moreover, it even gave off the glow effect unique to epic items. Fire Dance also had her hair tied up with a ribbon that resembled the starry sky. The ribbon gave her an indescribable sense of fierceness, as if she were the empress of the night sky. It seems Fire Dance also reaped a considerable harvest in the space-time maze. Chiffon was slightly surprised at the dagger hanging by Fire Dance's waist. Not only did the dagger exude a faint sense of hostility, but it even roiled the ambient mana. If this dagger were unsheathed, he couldn't even begin to imagine the impact it would have on the environment. Even fragmented legendary items paled in comparison to this dagger. However, when Chiffon swept his gaze across gentle snow and aqua rose, who sat on both sides of the conference table, he was taken aback. How can this be? Chiffon was rendered speechless. After what Liang Jing had said, he had already mentally prepared himself for the worst. However, now that he saw them in person, he realized that the two situation exceeded his worst expectations. Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's weapons and equipment remained the same as when they left the Western continent. Even their levels were still at level 117. However, the feeling the two gave off was utterly different. Gentle Snow had been rather aloof in the past but still relatively sociable. On the other hand, Aqua Rose had been a cheerful and assertive woman, and her eyes had always sparkled with wisdom and ambition. Now, however, the two of them could no longer be considered human. Neither of them exuded the slightest hint of emotion. As if they were plants, they did not appear happy or sad. Although they were currently communicating with the others around them, their voices did not fluctuate with any emotion whatsoever. The only thing Chiffon could sense from the two was a deathly silence, although the feeling of silence each gave off was slightly different. In the case of Gentle Snow, her silence resembled bones piled atop a battlefield. In the case of Aqua Rose, her silence was like a candle flame in the dark, carrying both death and hope. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Besides Chiffon, everyone else inside the room also sensed the changes in Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. If not for the Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose they retained in their memories, everyone might have even had the urge to flee the scene immediately. Guild leader, did something happen to the two vice guild leaders? Yulan asked Chiffon through a whisper. The change to Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose might not be noteworthy for those unfamiliar with them. But for those who were, this change was simply terrifying and creepy. Given how they are now, it seems something must have happened, Chiffon answered, not hiding the truth. After all, this was obvious to everyone present. During the time Zero Wings members were secretly discussing Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's changes, Chiffon also shifted his gaze to the two of them. How long did you two live in that world? Chiffon asked them through a whisper. Chapter 2703, 80 Years. Chapter 2703, 80 Years. Chiffon's words were like a drop of water falling into a silent ocean. Although it couldn't kick up any huge waves, it still caused ripples that spread out endlessly. As soon as Chiffon finished voicing his inquiry, a hint of surprise flashed across Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's calm eyes. This surprise contained neither excitement nor joy. They didn't feel as if they found someone that understood them, either. They simply felt a little surprised. They wondered why Shifeng would know of this matter. However, their surprise soon disappeared, and darkness and calmness returned to their eyes. Afterward, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow exchanged glances. Aqua Rose then turned to Shifeng, an indifferent smile forming on her beautiful face. Sure enough, nothing can get past you, guild leader. We aren't sure how long we lived in that world. However, according to our calculations, it should be 80 years. 80 years? Shifeng couldn't help but gasp. Even his mind had gone slightly numb. He had thought of the possibility of Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow living in that special world for a considerable period. He had even considered the possibility of them living there for a decade or two. But 80 years. Many people lived only 80 years in their lifetimes. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had spent 80 years fighting ceaselessly every day. The mere thought was chilling. To spend 80 years alone. Just the loneliness alone was already unimaginable. Any normal person would have most likely gone crazy already. However, Aqua Rose's voice was incomparably calm, so calm that it was like she was talking about someone else's problem. 80 years. Complex emotions filled Shifeng's eyes as he quietly observed Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. It's no wonder you two feel like monsters. The moment he laid eyes on Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, he could already tell that the two of them were no longer human. After listening to Aqua Rose's explanation, he understood everything. If the two of them had spent 80 years in endless slaughter and combat, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were the strongest in the world in combat experience. Compared to them, the 10 years of combat experience he had in God's domain was nothing. Not to mention, both of them were combat geniuses. At this time, in terms of combat power, he was most likely a baby in front of Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. A baby trying to see through the thoughts and standards of an adult was simply a joke. Not to mention, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow would be adults even among Grandmaster martial artists. This situation placed Shifeng at a loss. He didn't know whether he should feel happy or helpless. Guild leader, Frost Heaven's Mushin just contacted us. While Shifeng was in a daze, Liang Jing, who stood beside him, suddenly spoke up. Mushin wants Zero Wing to gather at the Fire Dragon Empire's imperial capital. She says we are allowed to bring at most 20 people. It seems they're finally ready to act. Shifeng didn't feel particularly surprised at this piece of news. After all, Duan Hanshan had already said that Frost Heaven would soon take action. Did she tell you their plan? She did. Liang Jing nodded with a slightly gloomy face. Guild leader, are we really going to participate in Frost Heaven's operation this time? If possible, I wouldn't want to, either. However, Frost Heaven's offer is too tempting to refuse, Shifeng said with a bitter smile. 3 reserved slots for the upper zone. This wasn't an opportunity one could come across every day. Even the various superpowers would pounce on it. Not to mention, the upper zone had an important benefit he needed. While Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose might have gained 80 years of combat experience in that special world and achieved inhuman levels of combat standards, these benefits came with a huge drawback. On the surface, it would seem as if the two had lived in that special world for 80 years. However, only weeks had gone by in the real world. The instant the two left that special world, it would be as if 80 years of memories had been downloaded into their brains, placing an unimaginable burden on both their brains and bodies. During his previous life, the players that lived in that special world for 2 or 3 years had gradually had problems with their bodies after they returned. Eventually, they became paralyzed and had to be hospitalized for a month before they recovered. After all, digesting all these memories had consumed a lot of their mental strength, which definitely wasn't a good thing. Meanwhile, both Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had lived in that special world for 80 years. Shifeng didn't dare imagine how massive a backlash they would suffer. For the two's safety, he had to bring them to the upper zone. Although the S-rank nutrient fluid had great recovery effects on the human body, it only helped a little in healing a person's brain and spirit. Only medicines for brain and spirit recovery could resolve this problem. Of all the medicines Shifeng knew, even the life potion wasn't particularly effective in spirit recovery. The most the life potion could do was restore ordinary depletions of mental strength. It was utterly ineffective against a brain overload like this. The only solution he could think of now was the upper zone. The upper zone was a special region the Green God Company constructed. There were plenty of unknowns inside. In fact, the precious S-rank nutrient fluids and life potions circulating in the market were merely obsolete medicine the Green God Company produced. Guild leader, Frost Heaven is too ambitious, Liang Jing commented despite herself. If we're not careful, Zero Wing might very well perish. What are they planning to do? Shifeng asked curiously. Their goal this time is to become one of the 12 great guilds of God's domain, Liang Jing said. The 12 Great Guilds wasn't a random title made up by players. Instead, this was a title given to the 12 strongest guilds recognized by the War God's Temple. The player guilds that become God's domain's 12 great guilds would enjoy numerous benefits across the main continent. They could even garrison an empire and be worshipped by the said empire. An empire's worship. Just this point alone was more than enough to allow a guild to pull ahead of the other superpowers. One could say that the position of the 12 great guilds was something all superpowers had to compete for. However, competing for this position wasn't an easy task. A guild had to satisfy a series of conditions to qualify. Firstly, guilds had to become one of the top 10 rookie guilds. After that, they had to compete for the 12 reserve seats of the 12 great guilds. However, this was going to be God's domain's first competition for the reserve seats. The War God's Temple had announced that 6 were empty this year. Hence, for this year only, player guilds could compete for the 6 empty reserve seats so long as they met the conditions for participation in the competition. Due to Zero Wing's poor foundation, Shifeng never even considered participating in the competition. There were 4 conditions for participation. 1. Submit 2,000 units of 7 Luminaries crystal to the War God's Temple. 2. Have a guild residence in the capital cities of 50 kingdoms and 12 empires. Simultaneously, the registering guild must also have the status of a 4-star guild. 3. Have over 1,000 Tier 3 players in the guild. 4. Have 30 guild cities under the guild's name. These 4 basic conditions were extremely harsh. Ordinary guilds shouldn't even dream of participating in the competition. In fact, even ordinary superpowers wouldn't qualify. Only the exceptionally strong superpowers could just barely meet the conditions. According to the information Zero Wing obtained from the secret pavilion, close to 20 super first-rate guilds and super guilds would participate in the competition for the reserve seats, every one of them a titan in the virtual gaming industry. One could easily imagine how intense the competition would be. No wonder Frost Heaven made such a lucrative offer. Realization also dawned upon Shifeng. In his previous life, Frost Heaven had first entered the ranks of top 10 rookie guilds and eventually became one of the 12 reserve guilds before slowly climbing up to join the 12 great guilds. However, Frost Heaven was not fully developed at this time. Trying to compete for one of the reserve seats so soon would most likely result in failure. Frost Heaven had to know this as well but was still grasping at a strand of hope. Guild leader, if we become Frost Heaven's foreign aid, any guild Frost Heaven confronts will probably treat us as a mortal enemy, Liang Jing explained. The position of the 12 reserve seats was a throne built atop countless bones. At present, Zero Wing was in a very terrible situation already. On one side, there was Starlink. On the other side, there were the newly developed superpowers. There was even the extremely dangerous Saint's Hand in the Orc Empire. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. If they offended a few more superpowers now, Zero Wing would no longer have a future in God's domain. Although it is very dangerous, this is also a chance for Zero Wing. It would be a shame to let it go, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Fire Dance and the others should get ready. We'll set out immediately. While contesting for the 12 reserve seats was indeed dangerous, if they succeeded, even as foreign aid, Zero Wing would receive the War God's Temple's recognition as well as some basic privileges. For example, city garrison rights and worship rights. While getting an entire country to worship Zero Wing was impossible, getting one city to do so was still possible. This was also why many guilds had fought to become foreign aid for the participating guilds in the past. Chapter 2704, Maddening Start. Fire Dragon Empire, Flame Dragon City. Chapter 2704, Maddening Start. Fire Dragon Empire. Flame Dragon City. Groups of players in black cloaks walked through the crowded commercial district of the imperial capital. What's going on? Why are there so many cloaked players on the streets today? Moreover, every one of them is so strong. A level 56, Tier 1 player, who came to the commercial district to upgrade his equipment, exclaimed in surprise when he saw the procession of cloaked players. Although Flame Dragon City was normally crowded with players, today's foot traffic was much more exaggerated than usual. Moreover, not only was the foot traffic triple the regular volume, but many of these new arrivals also gave off a strange vibe. In fact, players weren't the only ones wearing black cloaks. There were plenty of cloaked NPCs walking through the city as well, and every one of them radiated a terrifying aura. Although the city's resident NPCs were holding private discussions over this change, now that NPCs could think for themselves, they were deliberately avoiding players while discussing. This is normal. You've just started playing 5 Domain recently, so you might not know this, but today is the competition for the reserve seats of God's Domain's 12 Great Guilds. A level 109, Tier 3 man explained to the newcomer of his guild. God's Domain's 12 Great Guilds. The rookie shield warrior was surprised at his senior's words. Isn't that something determined by the Virtual Gaming Association? In the real world, the Virtual Gaming Association determined the publicly recognized super guilds annually. These positions were mostly fixed, very few changes would occur every year. No. This event is hosted by the War Gods Temple to determine God's Domain's 12 strongest guilds. It isn't a competition hosted in the real world, the Tier 3 man explained, chuckling. Does our guild have a chance to participate too? The rookie shield warrior asked, a hint of fighting spirit surfacing in his eyes. He had never heard of such a huge event happening in God's Domain before. Moreover, with God's Domain's current popularity, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the world's biggest competition. If he could stand out in this competition, he would definitely rise to prominence. Currently, the various major corporations were offering unprecedented prices to recruit experts in God's Domain. In fact, the top 50 experts on the God's Domain's experts list made even more money than A-list celebrities. We want to join, but the entry threshold is just too high. Even first-rate guilds aren't qualified. The Tier 3 man smiled bitterly. Nowadays, the various powers of God's Domain were all talking about the reserve seat competition. Even NPCs were discussing it. The competition's influence was unprecedented. In such a major competition, let alone securing one of the reserve seats, just being able to participate would already serve as proof of a guild's strength. In that case, is everyone here to participate in the competition today? The rookie shield warrior asked. The cloaked people are most likely participants. As for everyone else, they should be here to spectate, the Tier 3 man explained. Spectate? Can we go watch, as well? The rookie asked eagerly. I'm afraid that's not possible, the Tier 3 man replied with some embarrassment. The entry fee alone is 300 gold, while the VIP rooms cost 5,000 gold and 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Moreover, there are only 1,000 VIP rooms available. 300 gold was a huge sum, even for current Tier 3 players. In fact, most Tier 3 players didn't have 300 gold in their pockets. After all, with how high a Tier 3 player's daily expenses were, saving a lot of money was simply impossible. As for the VIP rooms, they were for the exclusive use of large guilds, individuals simply couldn't afford them. The 5,000 gold aside, just the 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal was already more than enough to distress first-rate guilds, what more second- and third-rate guilds. At this moment, the Tier 3 man wasn't the only person feeling embarrassed over this situation. Most of the other Tier 3 experts on the street also sighed. Spectating such a major competition would most likely yield a lot of benefits. I know, right? I heard that nearly 30 superpowers would participate in the competition, nearly 1/3 of them super guilds. Moreover, these superpowers are all sending their best. This is going to be the battle of a lifetime. I heard that too. Right now, everyone's going crazy over the VIP rooms. Some second- and third-rate guilds are even offering to pay double the price to get a room. Upon overhearing the discussions of other players on the street, The players who couldn't afford an entrance ticket yearned for one. God's Domain's various superpowers rarely waged war. They generally only fought in small skirmishes. However, the superpowers were now going all out. One could easily imagine how intense the competition would be. Meanwhile, such a major competition was held only once a year. Flame Dragon City, War God's Temple. At this time, the various superpowers members had already thronged the majestic headquarters of the Fire Dragon Empire's War God's Temple, numbering in the tens of thousands. Even the War God's Temple had no choice but to dispatch level 180 guards to maintain order. Meanwhile, on the top floor of a high-class restaurant near the War God's Temple, these superpowers are really being careful. Every one of their participating members has hidden their statistics and strength with black cloaks, Mu Lingshaw said, her lips curled in disappointment as she looked at the crowd outside. That's normal. This competition is going to determine which superpower will hold hegemonic rights over God's domain. It is only natural for them to try to hide as much information as possible. Anyone who exposes their cards now will only make easy targets of themselves, Unyielding Heart, who sat beside Mu Lingshaw, said, chuckling. However, I didn't expect for so many superpowers to apply for the competition in the Fire Dragon Empire. Although there are many empires in God's domain, only 4 of them are ancient nations. Any confident superpower wouldn't let go of these 4 nations. While guilds can register for the competition at any empire's capital, the guild that wins a reserve seat in their registered empire will receive additional benefits from the empire. Sighing, Mu Lingshaw continued, it's a pity Unyielding Soul lacks accumulations. Otherwise, we could have come here to try our luck too. I wonder who will secure the 6 reserve seats. When Unyielding Heart spoke of the reserve seats, a hint of yearning appeared in his eyes. We can probably already determine who will get 5 out of the 6 seats. The last is the important one. I'm afraid those guilds are going to have a bloody battle, Mu Lingshaw said gloatingly. The competition for the reserve seats was most likely going to be extremely intense. After all, if nothing unexpected happened, 5 of the 6 available seats would go to the 5 great super guilds. This left the other superpowers to compete over just 1 seat. The mere thought of the competition's intensity scared her. Look. Mythology's people are here, Mu Lingshaw said as she looked at a group of undisguised players walking down the distant street. At the head of this team was none other than Cold Shadow. Mythology's arrival instantly cast a grim shadow over the plaza in front of the War God's Temple. Setting aside the fact that Mythology was one of the virtual gaming industry's publicly acknowledged 5 great super guilds, just the fact that Mythology's members were doing nothing to hide their strength already proved how confident Mythology was in its strength. Although this team from Mythology wasn't the main force that would participate in the competition, even the weakest in the team of several hundred was a level 116, tier 3 player. Moreover, the base equipment standard of these people was level 115 fine gold set equipment. So, this is Mythology's strength. As expected of one of the 5 great super guilds. Even the team they sent to register is already so powerful. I really wonder how strong Mythology's representative team on the Western continent is. The spectators from the various superpowers and large guilds couldn't help growing fearful when they looked at Mythology's team. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Meanwhile, as Mythology's members submitted their registration to the War God's Temple, a round of exclamations suddenly rose from the plaza's edge. After Mythology's team, another team of players actually arrived uncloaked. Moreover, this team only had a little over a dozen players in it. Are they insane? Mu Lingshaw froze in the middle of sipping her black tea when she saw this small team. After all, this team belonged to none other than the currently famous Zero Wing. Chapter 2705. We have our way, they are as bold as ever. Chapter 2705. We have our way, they are as bold as ever. Cold Shadow, who was registering Mythology for the competition before the War God's Temple, was slightly surprised to see Shifeng and the others among the crowd. They're tired of living, a nearly 3-meter tall, heavily armored man standing beside Cold Shadow said disdainfully. Previously, they rejected your kindness and missed out on a great opportunity. Now, they actually dare take part in this event, even exposing their own data. They shouldn't think of getting through the foreign aid selection at this rate. The various superpowers had all recruited foreign aid for this competition. However, due to the rules, they could recruit only 100 outside helpers, at most. Moreover, each helper cost 30 units of 7 luminaries crystal to register, a huge burden on the various superpowers' finances. To make matters worse, recruiting foreign aid was one thing. Whether the recruited foreign aid could pass the preliminary selection and earn points for the guild they supported was another thing altogether. If the recruited foreign aid didn't pass the preliminary selection, then all the 7 luminaries crystals spent would go down the drain. Due to these reasons, the various superpowers wouldn't let go of even the slightest chance to defeat their opponents, let alone give away advantageous information to their opponents. With the classes in God's domain countering each other, even peak experts would have trouble when going up against opponents that countered their class. In a situation where one side thoroughly understood their opponent's basic attributes and equipment, that side could accurately arrange the appropriate manpower to suppress their opponents. Now that Zero Wing had leaked all this information, its members would be hard-pressed not to get targeted. What is that black flame thinking? Did nobody tell them that this operation requires concealment? The eyes of a group of cloaked players standing at the edge of the plaza nearly fell out of their sockets when Zero Wing's members came into sight. The competition for the 12 Great Guilds reserve seats was an event of utmost importance. The various superpowers had spent a lot of effort just to hide their strength. Some superpowers had even purchased camouflage items for some of their ace members for fear that these members would get perfectly countered. However, Zero Wing had done none of that and boldly displayed its information to the various superpowers. Hong Xinyuan, are these the trump cards you spent 3 reserve slots to recruit? You've truly opened this old man's eyes, an elderly man with graying hair said as he looked at Hong Xinyuan standing beside him. The wrath in his voice made even Mushin and the other vice guild leaders nearby shudder. Great Elder Blue, this should be an accident, Mushin hurriedly explained to the blue-robed old man named Brilliant Blue. Brilliant Blue was one of Frost Heaven's 5 frost pillars. Previously, Brilliant Blue had nearly flipped over Frost Heaven because of Hong Xinyuan's decision to give away 3 upper zone reserve slots to Zero Wing. In the past, the Boulder Corporation had rejected Brilliant Blue's request for a reserve slot for his grandson. However, he had eventually dropped the matter. After all, the reserve slots were extremely precious, and the Green God Company wouldn't necessarily gift the Boulder Corporation with slots every year. Now, however, Hong Xinyuan had decided to give away 3 of these precious slots to a bunch of outsiders without even consulting with anyone. There was no way Brilliant Blue wouldn't get angry over this matter, especially with Zero Wing having made such a huge blunder now. An accident. Brilliant Blue laughed when he heard this. That's right. This is indeed an accident. An accident on a scale this old man has never seen before. Lan having no excuses for this situation, Hong Xinyuan said apologetically, some problems have indeed occurred this time, but Zero Wing's members are undoubtedly strong. They are indeed pretty good. Of the 17 of them, even the lowest leveled person is level 117, while the highest has even reached level 121. Each of them also has 6 pieces of epic equipment on average. This is a rare sight even among the various superpowers main force teams, Brilliant Blue said. He then turned to the other elders present and continued, however, they have exposed all their data now. It will be child's play for the other superpowers to counter them. Frost Heaven's 7 luminaries crystals aren't easy to come by. Every piece is exchanged using the guild members' blood and sweat. I don't want to see those crystals wasted. I suggest removing Zero Wing now and having my grandson's subordinates fill up the remaining slots. When Brilliant Blue finished speaking, the guild elders present fell silent for a while. I think what Great Elder Blue said is logical. Now that Zero Wing has made such a blunder, we do need to replace them, one of the vice guild leaders standing behind Brilliant Blue said and nodded. Blue's words aren't unreasonable. I also think that it is necessary to replace them, a white-haired Grand Elder said. The dispute over the reserve seats will greatly impact God's domain's future. It might even determine Frost Heaven's life and death. We cannot afford to be sloppy in this matter. We don't have to take such a risk, either. That's right. There is indeed no need for us to take this risk. After the white-haired Grand Elder spoke up, the other guild elders present also started voicing their agreement with Brilliant Blue's suggestion. As for the matter of finding new foreign aid to replace Zero Wings members, nobody present was concerned about that. The various superpowers had prepared plenty of substitutes for today's event. Naturally, Frost Heaven wasn't an exception. Not to mention, Brilliant Blue's grandson wasn't some simpleton, either. In fact, he had gained the title of Sloth in the Flower of Seven Sins. If not for his having joined the Flower of Seven Sins, he would have already become a vice-guild leader in Frost Heaven. Meanwhile, the Flower of Seven Sins was an organization proficient at assassination. Its members were natural killers. There was no superpower more adept at dealing with players than the Flower of Seven Sins, not even superguilds. Brilliant Blue's grandson was one of Frost Heaven's trump cards in this competition. Having the Flower of Seven Sins' peak experts replace Zero Wings members wouldn't be a problem at all. Of course, Brilliant Blue's selfishness also played a role in his decision. The 3 reserve slots Hong Xinyuan offered to Zero Wing were actually his personal property. They didn't belong to the guild or the Boulder Corporation. Brilliant Blue couldn't force Hong Xinyuan to give them to him. However, if Zero Wing got removed and Brilliant Blue's grandson helped Frost Heaven secure a reserve seat, Hong Xinyuan would have to give those 3 upper zone reserve slots to Brilliant Blue's grandson to preserve his reputation. Just as the various elders present were about to reach a consensus, someone interrupted them. "Dear elders, don't you think you're going a little too far?" Mushin said. "Mushin, where do you think we've gone too far? Do you find my words unreasonable?" Brilliant Blue asked in dissatisfaction. "What you said indeed makes sense, Great Elder Blue." Mushin nodded. However, Uncle Hong contributed nearly half of the 7 luminaries crystals we used to recruit foreign aid this time. If not for his contribution, Frost Heaven would have had difficulty collecting so many crystals. Now, Uncle Hong is only taking 17 slots for his own use, yet you are arbitrarily deciding to replace Zero Wing already. Isn't that a bit much? At least let Uncle Hong decide this matter himself. At Mushin's words, the Grand Elders and Elders present fell silent. What Mushin said was the truth. Without the 7 luminaries crystals Hong Xinyuan contributed, they really wouldn't have been able to register so many outside helpers for the competition. Now, Hong Xinyuan wasn't even using 1/5 of the total slots. They indeed didn't have the right to reject or help Hong Xinyuan decide. "What you say is correct, but we are also doing this in consideration of the guild's future," Brilliant Blue said righteously. "Old Hong, didn't you contribute those crystals for the sake of the guild, as well?" Just when Brilliant Blue wanted to say something more, a dignified, middle-aged man in the team suddenly spoke up. "Stop arguing. Do you plan to make fools of yourselves in front of the other superpowers?" As soon as this middle-aged man spoke up, everyone present fell silent. Respect also appeared in everyone's eyes as they looked at this man. However, Brilliant Blue still refused to budge. "Guild leader, we cannot afford to be careless in this matter. Others might be afraid of 7 Wonders, the guild leader of Frost Heaven, but not Brilliant Blue. Not only was Brilliant Blue one of the 5 Frost Pillars, but he was also 1 generation older than 7 Wonders. Hence, 7 Wonders still had to take his words seriously. Enough. 7 Wonders frowned. This matter ends here. We will not remove Zero Wing. However, what Great Elder Blue said is reasonable, as well. Notify Zero Wing that we won't help them during the preliminary selection. This is their problem, so they have to solve it themselves. Frost Heaven does not have any excess combat power to spare." Guild leader. Mushin was startled. She never thought that 7 Wonders would make such a decision. This was equivalent to abandoning Zero Wing. Hong Xinyuan also frowned at this decision. Without Frost Heaven's assistance, Zero Wing would most likely have difficulty getting through the preliminaries. And even if Zero Wing passed, not many of them should remain. "Enough. Get it done," 7 Wonders said resolutely. "Understood," Mushin sighed. Mushin was powerless to change 7 Wonders' decision. She immediately relayed the news to Shifeng. As for how far Zero Wing could reach, that would depend entirely on Zero Wing itself. "Guild leader, Frost Heaven is having us fend for ourselves, Yang Tianxing said, startled by the message Shifeng shared with the team. Yang Tianxing had advised Shifeng to conceal their information. However, Shifeng had rejected his suggestion. Now, look what happened. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What do you guys think? Shifeng asked Fire Dance and the others, chuckling. Let them. We have our way of doing things. Why should we play by their rules? Fire Dance said nonchalantly. Big Sis Fire is right. I've also been itching for a good fight lately, Violet Cloud said, a hint of excitement flashing in her eyes. Similarly, Cola and the others also expressed their eagerness for a good fight. Since that's the case, let's go get registered. Chapter 2706, Selection Battle. Chapter 2706, Selection Battle. Inside a high-class bar near the War God's Temple's plaza. A feminine man in a light grey cloak appeared silently beside a handsome young man drinking red wine inside the bar. As if the feminine man did not exist, none of the bar's other occupants noticed his arrival. Young master, it'll be difficult to get those reserve slots. Seven Wonders did not remove Zero Wing. He only decided to let Zero Wing fend for itself, the feminine man whispered. Zero Wing's members have registered already. Now, all they have to do is wait 3 hours for the preliminary selection to begin. Zero Wing sure is lucky not to get removed even after making such a blunder. The handsome young man named Sorrowful Heaven frowned slightly, then said coldly, however, Zero Wing shouldn't even think of getting its hands on even one of those reserve slot. Sorrow, how about I attack them directly afterward? A girl with disheveled hair sitting beside Sorrowful Heaven suggested, excitement sparkling in her eyes. The woman had the flower of Seven Sins' symbol imprinted on her arm. As soon as this small and delicate girl spoke up, everyone inside the bar shook visibly as they reluctantly recalled a scene in the past. Hayes, you have to abide by the rules this time. Otherwise, I won't bring you out anymore, Sorrowful Heaven said. A hint of fear had also surfaced in his eyes when he looked at this harmless-looking girl. Even after becoming one of the Seven Sins, Sorrowful Heaven still dared not act carelessly around this girl. After all, death was the best relief when one went against this harmless girl. Even the flower of Seven Sins' mysterious leader got a headache when dealing with her. If they did not manage her properly, she would easily trigger a catastrophe. Don't worry. I'll definitely listen to you during this mission. I won't recklessly do anything to those people. The girl named Imperial Hayes nodded obediently and giggled. That's good. Sorrowful Heaven breathed out a sigh of relief. He then said slowly, we don't have to worry about Zero Wing this time. Now that Zero Wing has exposed all its data, the other superpowers' foreign aid will target them first. We won't have to do anything to Zero Wing. On the contrary, while everyone else is focused on Zero Wing, we can search for the War God orders. The selection match for foreign aid was straightforward. All registered foreign aid would be teleported to a special space to search for the War God orders scattered there. They would have 5 hours to do so, and once the time was up, all participants holding a War God order would pass the selection. However, the number of War God orders was limited to 100. In other words, only 100 players, at most, could pass the selection. Compared to the number of foreign aid the various superpowers had recruited, the number of available slots was pitifully small. According to the information they obtained, 6 super first-rate guilds and 3 super guilds had come to the Fire Dragon Empire to register for the competition. This meant that 900 players would participate in the preliminary selection, and only 1/9 of these participants could officially become foreign aid. Everyone else would just be wasting their 7 luminaries crystals. Meanwhile, Zero Wing only had 17 members participating in the selection. Trying to secure War God orders while going up against so many experts was simply a fool's dream. As Sorrowful Heaven was considering how he could capitalize on Zero Wing's predicament, Cold Shadow was resting inside one of the War God's Temple's lounges. When she received news of Zero Wing's situation, she revealed a satisfied smile. Vice Guild Leader, did you receive good news? The female guardian Knight Whitefeather asked in surprise. Yes. Cold Shadow replied. Although I don't know which dumb guild it was that invited Zero Wing is dead for sure this time. None of Zero Wing's members should even dream of passing the selection. Vice Guild Leader, Zero Wing's 17 members possess extraordinary strength. While not all of them can pass, there is still a chance that 2 or 3 of them will succeed, Whitefeather said, shaking her head in disagreement. It might have been possible before, but I'm afraid it's not anymore, Cold Shadow said in a playful tone. According to our spies, the Sky Dragon House and Pride Empire have come forward to work with Demon Palace and Miracle to annihilate Zero Wing. How is this possible? This revelation stunned Whitefeather. The competition for the 6 reserve seats was incredibly intense, and every participating power was treating the others as mortal enemies. 2 superpowers working together was already unbelievable. Now, 4 superpowers had actually banded together to target Zero Wing. What exactly had Zero Wing done to anger all these guilds? Nothing's impossible. Chuckling, Cold Shadow said, did you forget whom Zero Wing offended before? Is this Saint's Hand's doing? Whitefeather immediately thought of the incomparably mysterious Saint's Hand. That's right. Saint's Hand promised the 4 guilds something, and the 4 guilds agreed without hesitation. Cold Shadow nodded. Smiling, she continued, I doubt even Zero Wing would have expected that this preliminary selection would turn into their execution. Zero Wing is truly finished this time. Whitefeather sighed at this situation. Nearly half of the 900 players entering the battlefield were going to target Zero Wing. None of Zero Wing's members should even think of leaving the battlefield alive. After all, the preliminary selection's battlefield was a special space that prohibited players from using berserk skills and tools and increased the consumption of stamina and concentration by tenfold. Such rules would greatly restrict the participants' combat power. Even powerful players would have difficulty fighting for a long time and would be vulnerable to Zerg tactics. Meanwhile, players who died within that special space would not only lose 5 levels but also be prevented from logging into the game for 5 natural days. This was the price for participating in the competition for the 12 Great Guilds reserve seats. Zero Wing had mobilized all its top combatants for the competition this time. If Zero Wing team wiped, the guild would undoubtedly suffer a devastating blow. Following which, time passed quickly. Amid the various superpowers' anticipation, the 9 foreign aid teams arrived inside the War God's Temple selection hall. A total of 900 players stood on all sides of the hall. Some groups were large, while others were small. However, aside from Zero Wing's members, everyone else present had concealed their information using black cloaks. Are they the targets? What a pitiful bunch. They probably don't know that our 4 forces have joined hands already. Once the competition begins, we'll attack them together. I wonder if they'll get scared silly at that time? How unfortunate. I wanted to challenge that black flame to check the results of my recent training. Now, this chance is gone. The helpers of the Sky Dragon family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace, and Miracle conversed with each other through the team chat, their words filled with ridicule and sympathy for Shifeng's group. Sorrow, those teams are acting strangely. Every one of them is actually staring at Zero Wing's members, Imperial Haze stated as she looked at the 4 superpowers members. That's not surprising. Who asked Zero Wing's members to be so courageous? Sorrowful Heaven retorted nonchalantly. If I weren't afraid of Hong Xinyuan holding me accountable and refusing to give me those reserve slots afterward, I would send Zero Wing's members on their way even if the other superpowers didn't target them. Is that so? Imperial Haze still couldn't help growing uncertain as she looked at the 4 superpowers foreign aid teams. By the way, we'll first pretend to move together with Zero Wing afterward. However, so long as we come across other teams during the operation, we'll immediately split away from Zero Wing and let Zero Wing's members tie down the enemy. Remember, you better not take action, Sorrowful Heaven said sternly. I understand. Imperial Haze nodded. Shortly after Sorrowful Heaven finished speaking, everyone in the hall felt their vision blur momentarily. When they recovered, they discovered that they had already arrived inside a forested valley. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After scanning his surroundings, Sorrowful Heaven found that the various teams were situated relatively close to each other. If they abandoned Zero Wing too soon, they would most likely get caught by a different team during their retreat. "We'll move together with Zero Wing first," Sorrowful Heaven said through the team chat. However, even after Sorrowful Heaven gave this command, none of the Flower of Seven Sins' members moved. Instead, they all stood still, looking dumbfounded. This was because nearly half of the foreign aid teams present had started dashing in their direction like a bunch of madmen as Sorrowful Heaven issued his command. "What's going on?" Sorrowful Heaven was similarly stunned as he looked at the several hundred players charging at his team from all directions. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.